Hey. Look at what I found. Look at it. It's got locations. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. You're a dungeon master who is going through their adventure as your players do something a little bit unexpected. Whether it be going off the rails your campaign, finding the boss too early, or the dreaded shopping adventure. And you have nothing prepared for that. Well, this is going to help you out a lot. Let me tell you about it. This thing is chocked full of locations with maps and NPCs. I mean, look at this one. This is a caravan bazaar. And look at this list here. That is 20 different NPCs that you're able to put into this bazaar. That is 20 shops. And look at this one. Look at this one. It's called Mage You Look. Get it? Mage you look? Mage you look? Got it? Yeah, you got it. And guess where I found this nifty little booklet? Just sitting on a magazine rack at my local grocery store. Isn't that crazy? So, when you're done with this video, go to your local grocery store and scour the magazine cabinet to find this random encounters table. You can thank me later. Subscribe! We've talked about this multiple times. I have gone over it at least 3 times. And that is the statistics of items and other objects within Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And I thought we would go over a couple more rules surrounding these objects. And there are a couple that I was honestly surprised at. But others, I was surprised they weren't being used. Let's go ahead and start off with weapon sizes. And this is because we have weapons that are mostly made for medium creatures. From the Triton to the Furbolg. You're a medium creature. So all your weapons and your armor are going to be medium. At least be worn by a medium creature. But what if those weapons are of a larger, or perhaps even smaller size? Well, we actually have rules for this. And here is how we look at it. In the Dungeon Master's Guide on page 287, we have big monsters typically wield oversized weapons that deal extra dice of damage on a hit. Double the weapon dice if the creature is large. Triple the weapon dice if it is huge. Quadruple the weapon dice if it's gargantuan. A creature has disadvantage on attack rolls with a weapon that is sized for larger attackers. You could rule that a weapon sized for an attacker 2 or more sizes larger is too big for a creature to use at all. And we actually get to see this a lot when dealing with large creatures, like with the giants. They have bigger weapons. And hence, those weapons are able to do more damage. A large axe does 1 extra die of damage, while a huge one does 3d12 compared to the 1d12 of the weapon sized for a medium creature. And according to the sprite stat block, we even have a way to make these weapons tiny. A weapon sized for a tiny creature would actually deal a lot less damage. Because a longsword would normally deal 1d10, but here it deals only 1 damage. That leads me to believe that any weapon that is made tiny, instead of dealing the damage dice, or that it is given, it only deals how many damage dice it originally was able to deal. So for example, a greatsword that is able to do 2d6 damage will only be able to deal 2 damage in its tiny variant. That makes sense? Great. And now we're going to go over briefly the statistics of objects, since I already went over it in another video, in a couple of videos. But in short, objects have their own stat blocks for armor class and for hit points. The armor class is based off the material that it is made out of. Cloth, crystal, wood, stone, steel, mithril, or adamantine. And also, the object's hit points is based off of their size. And the table actually shows us some examples of what these objects might be of this certain size. So, with that being said, we actually do have a way of having objects with durability. And once they break, they are no longer usable. Unless you use them as an improvised weapon. But, for the most part, you're going to have a useless item, or an item that no longer is functionable. The adventure module Tyranny of Dragons actually gives us a good example of these rules in the very first chapter, Greenest in Flames, where you have to protect a door from being destroyed. Secondly, you also have a door that you kind of need to break down, the sewer grate. But both of these examples in this chapter are a perfect tutorial for your characters to work with the statistics of objects, since there is a lot of stuff to go off of. So just introducing them by using this chapter or a similar sort of adventure would be perfect for introducing this rule. And if you are a homebrewer, this would be perfect way for you to have your constructs that are just animated versions of certain objects. You'll be able to have your armor class and your hit points just by using these few pieces of rules. Now we're going to go over a question that I've heard and had a couple of times. Adamantine weapons. How do they function? Because with adamantine armor or adamantine armor, while wearing it, you treat a critical hit as a normal hit. But what about an adamantine weapon? Well, we actually have an answer for this in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. You know, the book that nobody reads unless they want to make a absolutely broken character build. Yeah, right here. On page 78, we have the following rules. Melee weapons and ammunition made of or coated with adamantine are unusually effective when used to break objects. Whenever adamantine weapon or piece of ammunition hits an object, it is a critical hit. Which is a very surprising rule. You would think it would be an automatic critical on any sort of target, but it's against an object. So if we pair this with an earlier rule that we just talked about, the large weapons, a gargantuan greatsword would deal 8d6 damage, but coated in adamantine against an object would make it critical, which means that you would double that damage dice for 16d6 points of damage before you add the creature's strength modifier. That is insane. You have what is amounting to a 9th level fireball, maybe even greater, in just one weapon attack. And that's not counting if you have other subclasses, like the Juggernaut Barbarian, which has the siege property for your characters, which could, in theory, give you an attack that deals 32d6 damage, if everything goes as planned. Moving on from adamantine weapons, we also have some homebrew I want to talk about, because we have spells like the spell Fireball, which state each creature in this range takes damage. I've heard one or two jokes or one or two unfortunate horror stories about dungeon masters who punish their characters for using certain spells by having those spells affect objects. But this is not correct for these cases. Though it is technically homebrew, it's not appropriate for a spell such as Fireball to deal damage to objects, because it's basically a giant heat wave. Even though it does say explosion of flame, it's technically more of a heat wave. It's not supposed to damage objects. It's not a concussive blast. It's not going to deal damage to objects. Then you have dynamite. Each creature takes the damage. It doesn't say objects, though you would think it would, since we are talking about a stick of dynamite or a bomb. So I would say homebrewing this little piece to where it does affect objects. You know, given that a object doesn't have a good damage threshold. Next, we have special weapon properties. When you think of certain movies and shows, you'll see the battle have one character damage another character's armor with their attack, or the classic claw shreds at the enemy's clothing. So why don't we have that in Dungeons and Dragons? It's almost as if your clothing and armor are immune to some of these attacks. This is why I think having some special weapon properties for appropriate items, such as a maul or a warhammer, being able to dent at armor or even punch a hole in armor like it does in real life, is actually pretty good. So for this concept, I have these two special properties. The first is if a melee attack with this weapon misses against a creature wearing armor or a shield, and the attack roll is equal to or greater than the AC of that object, not the AC it provides to a creature's AC. Remember, each object has their own armor class. Then, the armor or shield, which is your choice, becomes the new target for the attack. This is very similar to how you would attack someone and they would raise their shield to defend. Or if you're able to attack them, and the attack just hits their armor, like, say, an axe gets embedded into someone's leather armor, or someone strong enough into their metal armor. It's just embedded in there, but it doesn't damage them. This is that effect. Now, the second part of this ability is that this feature gets ignored if the target creature has uncanny dodge, evasion, or similar ability, and this is how we balance this sort of feature. By having a way that a character can get out of it, and for this reason, monks and rogues would be able to avoid this sort of damage to their equipment. Next is this ability. If a melee attack with this weapon hits a creature wearing medium or heavy armor while using a shield, this weapon deals damage to that armor or shield, which is your choice, equal to the wielder's strength modifier. Like I said earlier, this is to represent the warhammer or maul striking a foe, say, in the chest, and they're wearing a chest plate. Well, the maul or warhammer is going to still damage that armor, but also damage the creature wearing it at the same time. Though not as badly on the armor, though it will seem that way with the appropriate statistics. Going back on those statistics we talked about earlier. Now, with that being said, I really like this concept. But we can take it further by homebrewing a new weapon. Let's go ahead and take a look at this idea that I have for the Sword Breaker Dagger. This weapon is crazy. You would use this to block an attack from a sword, and then use both yours and your opponent's strength against the sword, snapping it into making it worthless. And that is what I've come up with this very concept. Here's the effect. Special. It has a prerequisite. You have to have one of these features. Either the fighting style of interception, the maneuver parry, or the feat defensive duelist. And you'll see why. If you are wielding this weapon and use your reaction to increase your AC against a melee weapon attack, or to reduce the damage from a melee weapon attack, you can make a grapple check against the weapon that was used as part of that reaction. This is to symbolize your dagger grappling the weapon that was used against you. This check is automatically successful if increasing your armor class caused the attack to miss, or if you reduce the damage of the attack to 0. This is some of those special scenes where you're able to just outright block with your weapon. And I think it works perfectly for this scene with the dagger's effect. The creature wielding the grappled weapon is considered restrained until they release the grappled weapon. On your turn, if you have a weapon grappled and its wielder restrained this way, you can use one of your attacks to either make a disarming check against the weapon's wielder, being able to take the weapon like sometimes is seen with these special daggers, or attack the grappled weapon. On a hit, deal damage to the grappled weapon equal to 1d4, plus the damage, bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing, your reaction had reduced, or the AC bonus you gained from this reaction times 2. So, let's say that you had a longsword become blocked. That is a 1d10 from that weapon. If you are able to reduce that 1d10 to a 0, like we did above, you're dealing whatever damage that was back to the sword. Or, if you manage to block it using your defensive duelist feature, you get to add that AC bonus, which according to defensive duelist is your proficiency bonus, to the weapon's damage times 2. So you can have as much as 10 points of damage added on to the Swordbreaker Dagger's attack. This will give off the effect of breaking your opponent's sword, much like it is designed to do in real life. I absolutely love this weapon, and I think I'll introduce it in an upcoming campaign. Next up is a question that has come up frequently, and that is ignited objects. You'll have an item or ability that is able to cause a flammable object to ignite, and it'll continuously take damage on each of its turns until the flames are put out. And each one of these has a random damage type. But then you have spells like Firebolt, Burning Hands, and Fireball that also ignite. But they don't say how much damage this ignition does. This ignite property is what we're trying to look at, and there isn't a listed ruling. So, what is the damage? Well, that's where we start to get a little bit homebrewy, I think. Though not entirely. As you can see with an ability similar to the touch properties of the elementals, Fire Elemental or the Magman, you have the main damage from the attack, and then the ignite damage being only half of the original attack. And I think that's what we're going to base our ruling off of. So, if we go ahead and pull up the damage dice average damage chart from the Dungeon Master's Guide, we'll go ahead and take a look at the average damage of the spell's base level. So, Fireball normally does 8d6 damage, which is an average of 28. Burning Hands is 3d6 damage for an average of 10. Then we're going to divide those damage averages in half. So Fireball will be 14, and Burning Hands will be a 5. Then we're going to find the damage die that can be added to itself to become this new average, or close to it. For Fireball's case, that will be 2d12, for a total of 13. Or can stand alone to become this new average. For Burning Hands, that would be 1d10, or 5 damage. This becomes the fire damage of an ignited object the ignited object takes from the spell at the start of each of its turns. Does this count as homebrew? Probably. I don't know. But with that being said, that is all the time I have for you today. I do apologize for the late posting. This video was long overdue. Over a week overdue. But I've been a little bit procrastinating. I do apologize. I should be able to have my normal character builds back on schedule. So stay tuned for those. I do have some reloaded characters that have been requested, as well as an optimized druid wizard that will have your dungeon masters instantly ban it as soon as they hear the subclasses used. And I do have plans on doing a few more Pathfinder builds as soon as I figure out what to build. So stay tuned for those when they come out. That being said, this has been Drahon, and I am offline.